Before dawn on August 26, 1939, a small German raiding party crossed into Polish-controlled territory near the Jabłonków Pass. Their target was not a fortress or a city. It was a railway station at Mosty and the tunnel beyond it. If the tunnel remained open, German troops and supplies could use the line into southern Poland. If Polish engineers destroyed it, that approach would be closed. The raiders belonged to the Abwehr, German military intelligence, and were led by Lieutenant Hans-Albrecht Herzner. Their orders formed one small part of Case White, the German plan for the invasion of Poland. They were to seize the station, prevent the tunnel's demolition, and hold both until the Wehrmacht arrived. Herzner's men moved through unfamiliar ground in darkness, became divided, and reached the station without knowing that the operation supporting them no longer existed. Several hours earlier, Adolf Hitler had canceled the invasion. The cancellation had passed through the normal military chain of command, reaching armies already positioned along the frontier. It did not reach every clandestine detachment operating beyond the reach of ordinary communications. At Mosty, shots were exchanged. The station was attacked and briefly occupied, but the telephone system allowed an alarm to reach the Polish guard around the tunnel. The raiders could not secure their main objective. As morning arrived, they found themselves inside Poland waiting for an army that had been ordered to stay where it was. The men withdrew toward Slovakia. German officers later presented the clash as the work of an unstable individual acting without authority. The explanation was false, but both governments had reason to contain the incident. Germany was not yet ready to admit that an invasion order had already been issued. Poland's allies were still trying to prevent any frontier clash from becoming the event that began a European war. The Second World War did not formally begin at Jabłonków. Yet 6 days before September 1st, armed Germans had already crossed the Polish frontier under a genuine operational order. The war had been authorized, canceled too late for every unit, and left waiting while diplomacy tried to catch up with military machinery already in motion. The order behind the raid had been set in motion 5 months earlier. On April 3, 1939, the German Armed Forces High Command distributed instructions for Case White. The directive required preparations to be made so that the operation could begin at any time from September 1st. The Army, Navy, and Luftwaffe were ordered to coordinate their plans and submit detailed timetables. The orders went beyond ordinary contingency planning. Hitler had decided that a war against Poland must be possible within 5 months. The public dispute centered on Danzig and the Polish corridor. Danzig, known today as Gdansk, had a predominantly German population but was not part of the German Reich. Under the post-1919 settlement, it was a free city supervised by the League of Nations, while Poland held defined rights over its port, railways, customs arrangements, and foreign relations. The nearby military transit depot at Westerplatte allowed Poland to receive military supplies. The corridor connected the restored Polish state to the Baltic and separated East Prussia from the rest of Germany. These arrangements produced real disputes. They also gave Hitler a set of grievances that could be expanded, repeated, and converted into a claim that Germany was the injured party. From late 1938, Berlin demanded the return of Danzig, an extraterritorial road and railway across Polish territory, and a wider political alignment that would have drawn Poland into Germany's strategic system. Warsaw refused. The decision was shaped by more than the value of one city or one road. Austria had been absorbed. Czechoslovakia had surrendered the Sudeten territories at Munich, only for German troops to occupy Prague in March 1939. Polish leaders had watched concessions presented as final settlements become the platform for the next demand. Only 5 years earlier, Germany and Poland had signed a declaration promising to settle disputes without force. Hitler repeatedly praised that agreement in public. As late as September 1938, he presented the relationship with Poland as an example of two states overcoming inherited hostility. On April 28, 1939, after Warsaw rejected the new German demands and accepted Britain's guarantee, Hitler denounced the declaration. A diplomatic arrangement, once useful for keeping Poland neutral during Germany's earlier expansion, had become disposable when Poland would no longer move in the direction Berlin required. The occupation of Prague had changed the meaning of every assurance. At Munich, Hitler had claimed the Sudeten question represented his final territorial demand in Europe. Within 6 months, German forces controlled the Czech lands and Slovakia had been reduced to a dependent state. Poland had also taken territory from Czechoslovakia during the 1938 crisis, a decision that damaged its standing and remains part of the record. It did not follow that Poland was now obliged to accept German control over its foreign policy, its access to the sea, or the conditions under which its ambassador would negotiate. Hitler's private language removed any doubt about the scale of his purpose. At a conference with senior military leaders on May 23rd, recorded in the notes of his adjutant Rudolf Schmundt, he stated, "Danzig is not the subject of the dispute at all. The objective was territory, food supply, and living space in the east. Poland was to be isolated and attacked at the first suitable opportunity. The language of minority rights and access routes would remain useful in public." Inside the Reich Chancellery, senior commanders were being prepared for the destruction of the Polish state. Poland's position was severe even before the last crisis began. Its long frontier exposed it to attack from East Prussia in the north, Germany in the west, and, after the occupation of Czech lands and the subordination of Slovakia, from the south. The country had rebuilt state institutions, infrastructure, and armed forces during only 20 years of independence. It could mobilize a large army, but it could not match German industrial capacity, aircraft production, motor transport, or the concentration of modern armored formations. Its strategy, therefore, depended not on defeating Germany alone, but on surviving long enough for France and Britain to force Germany into a wider war. The map imposed choices for which there was no clean military answer. A defense concentrated farther east might shorten the front and make encirclement more difficult, but it would surrender much of western Poland, the industrial districts of Silesia, the corridor and access to the coast at the beginning of the campaign. Defending those regions placed armies closer to German starting positions and made them vulnerable to converging attacks. Political necessity and military necessity pulled in different directions. Poland could not begin a war by abandoning the territory whose sovereignty it was trying to defend. German planning exploited this exposure. Army Group North would attack from East Prussia and Pomerania. Army Group South would drive from Silesia and from the territory of Slovakia. The operational purpose was not simply to push Polish forces eastward. It was to break their armies near the frontier, disrupt mobilization, and prevent an orderly retreat before pressure from France or Britain could become decisive. Speed mattered because Germany was choosing a campaign with the possibility of a larger war behind it. Britain announced a guarantee to Poland on March 31st. France was already bound to Poland by alliance. These commitments strengthened Warsaw politically, but they did not place a British army on the Vistula or guarantee that French pressure in the West would arrive quickly enough to alter the first battles. Hitler's central calculation was that Britain and France might issue warnings yet still avoid war, as they had during earlier crises. Case White was built around the destruction of Poland before an effective Western intervention could develop. One remaining danger stood to the east. A German attack on Poland could become far more difficult if the Soviet Union opposed it, threatened Germany's rear, or joined Britain and France in a deterrent coalition. During the summer of 1939, British and French representatives negotiated with Moscow, but the talks moved slowly and distrust ran through every side. At the same time, Germany offered Stalin something more immediate: neutrality between the two dictatorships and a division of territory that neither intended to make public. On August 23rd, Joachim von Ribbentrop arrived in Moscow. That night, in the presence of Joseph Stalin, Germany and the Soviet Union signed a treaty of non-aggression. The public text promised that neither state would attack the other. A secret additional protocol divided parts of Eastern Europe into German and Soviet spheres of influence. In the event of what the protocol called a territorial and political rearrangement of the Polish state, the dividing line would run roughly along the narrow Vistula and San rivers. Whether any independent Poland would remain was left for Berlin and Moscow to decide later by what the protocol described as friendly agreement. Poland was not the only country placed on that private map. Finland, Estonia, and Latvia were assigned to the Soviet sphere. The original arrangement placed Lithuania largely within the German sphere, while recognizing Soviet interest in Bessarabia. The line would be revised after Poland was invaded, but the method was already established. States whose governments were not present had been converted into territories for later negotiation between Germany and the Soviet Union. The pact did not itself order a joint invasion on September 1st. It did something essential for Hitler's timetable. It removed the immediate risk that the Soviet Union would stand against Germany while the Wehrmacht fought in Poland. Ribbentrop later described the arrangement as a way to avoid a two-front war. Hitler's own letter to Mussolini on August 25th was equally direct in its confidence. He wrote that Russia's favorable attitude in a conflict was assured and that the new arrangement had transformed the strategic position. The agreement also exposed the limit of ideological language when set against state interest. Nazi propaganda had defined Bolshevism as an existential enemy. Stalin's government had presented fascism as a mortal threat. Neither position prevented a bargain when both regimes saw territorial and strategic advantage. Publicly, the treaty offered neutrality. In secret, its protocol divided the states between Germany and the Soviet Union into future spheres of control. For Poland, the public announcement was alarming enough. The secret protocol was not yet known in Warsaw, London, or Paris, but the sudden agreement between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union destroyed the remaining hope that their ideological hostility would keep them apart. Two states that had spent years condemning one another had agreed not to interfere while the map between them was changed. On August 25th, two messages changed Hitler's immediate calculation. In London, Foreign Secretary Lord Halifax and the Polish ambassador Edward Raczynski signed a formal agreement of mutual assistance. Britain and Poland committed themselves to support one another if either became involved in hostilities through aggression by a European power. A secret protocol clarified that the immediate danger meant Germany. The agreement converted Britain's political guarantee into a signed treaty on the same day German forces were preparing to attack. News from Rome brought a second warning. Italy was Germany's formal ally, but Benito Mussolini informed Hitler that his country was not ready for a general European war. Italian intervention, he wrote, could occur only if Germany immediately supplied the enormous quantities of military material and raw resources Italy lacked. Mussolini reminded Hitler that their earlier planning had envisaged war after 1942, not in August 1939. Italy would offer political and economic support if the conflict remained confined to Poland. If Britain and France entered, it could not simply join without assistance. Germany was in no position to provide. The two messages reached Hitler after the attack order had already gone out. The invasion was set to begin on the morning of August 26th. German armies were assembled. Aircraft had received targets. Naval forces were in position. Sabotage detachments had been instructed to cross the frontier before the main assault. The decision to stop this apparatus came late on the afternoon of August 25th and had to move through an organization designed for secrecy, surprise, and speed. Most formations received the cancellation. A few small actions still took place along the frontier. The failure at Jabłonków became the clearest evidence of how close the invasion had come. Herzner's detachment had not invented its orders. The men were executing a fragment of a national operation that had been halted after its outer parts were already moving. Hitler's hesitation lasted only long enough to test whether Britain could be detached from Poland. The International Military Tribunal later concluded that the invasion had been postponed because the Anglo-Polish agreement and Italy's unwillingness made Hitler hesitate, not because he had abandoned aggression. The objective remained. Diplomacy was given several more days to isolate Poland, confuse responsibility, and determine whether Britain's promise could be broken without a Western war. The approach to Britain combined threat with an offer of future cooperation. Hitler suggested that once the Polish dispute had been settled on German terms, the Reich could seek a broad understanding with the British Empire. He spoke of guarantees and limits on future competition, while warning that continued British support for Poland would produce conflict. The proposal asked London to separate its own long-term interests from the commitment it had just signed. Britain did not answer by closing negotiation. It continued to press Warsaw towards direct talks and told Berlin that a peaceful settlement of Danzig and the corridor remained possible. The condition was that Poland's independence and essential interests could not become the price of an Anglo-German agreement. This left Hitler with the issue he had been trying to remove: negotiations in which Poland would appear as a sovereign party rather than the object of decisions made elsewhere. At Mosty, the immediate consequences were practical. Polish forces reinforced the tunnel and remained prepared to destroy it. The German division expected to use the line had lost the advantage of surprise. On September 1st, Polish engineers would blow the tunnel rather than let it carry German military traffic. The raid had failed in its narrow purpose. Its larger significance lay in the order behind it. The days after August 26th are sometimes presented as a final peace conference in slow motion, with proposals moving between capitals until time ran out. The record shows something more deliberate. Britain continued to search for direct German-Polish negotiations. Poland stated that it was prepared to discuss the disputes. Germany imposed procedures and deadlines that made genuine negotiation increasingly difficult, while its armies remained deployed for an attack already planned in detail. On August 28th, the British government delivered its answer to Hitler. London accepted that German-Polish differences should be addressed through direct discussion, but insisted that Poland's essential interests be protected and that any settlement receive an international guarantee. Britain would not trade away the independence of a state it had promised to defend. Warsaw had already indicated that it would enter discussions on that basis. Hitler replied the following evening. The German government said it would accept British mediation and direct negotiation, but demanded the arrival in Berlin of a Polish plenipotentiary by the next day, August 30th. This representative was expected to possess full authority not merely to discuss proposals, but to conclude an agreement. No negotiated agenda had been provided. The German terms had not been transmitted to Warsaw. A sovereign government was being told to send a person with power to bind the country to Berlin within hours. The British ambassador, Sir Neville Henderson, told Hitler that the demand sounded like an ultimatum. Hitler and Ribbentrop denied that it was one. When London replied in the early hours of August 30th that producing a Polish representative in Berlin that same day was unreasonable, German officials answered that a flight from Warsaw took only an hour and a half. The distance was treated as the problem. Authority, procedure, and the memory of what had happened to other states in Berlin were ignored. Polish Foreign Minister Josef Beck had a precise reason for refusing to appear under those conditions. In March, Czechoslovak President Emil Hacha had been summoned to Berlin, subjected to intense pressure through the night, and compelled to accept the German occupation of his country. Beck told the British ambassador that he had no intention of being treated in the same way. Poland was prepared to negotiate, but not to send a fully empowered representative into a manufactured deadline without receiving the terms. The deadline also worked against Poland's military position. Mobilization had become inseparable from diplomacy. Poland had conducted partial and concealed mobilization measures since March, but a full call-up could be portrayed by German propaganda as aggression. Britain and France repeatedly urged restraint, fearing that general mobilization would destroy the remaining chance of talks or give Hitler a pretext. Warsaw delayed, while German formations completed their deployment under the cover of a crisis Berlin itself controlled. General mobilization was finally announced on August 30th, with the following day treated as the first mobilization day. The delay did not decide the campaign by itself. Germany held overwhelming operational advantages and had prepared the attack for months. It did mean that when the invasion began, many Polish formations were still assembling. An official Polish historical summary estimates that roughly 70% of the forces intended for defense had reached combat readiness. German forces had been allowed to reach a far more advanced state under language that avoided the political signal of general mobilization. Case White required secrecy and camouflage. A June instruction signed by Wilhelm Keitel emphasized that preparations must not alarm the population. Units moved as if for exercises, defensive precautions, or routine deployments until the concentration could no longer be hidden. Berlin then cited Poland's openly declared mobilization as evidence that Warsaw had chosen escalation. Mobilization was not a single order transformed instantly into divisions. It required notices to reach reservists, men to report to depots, horses and vehicles to be requisitioned, weapons to be issued, units to form, and trains to move them towards concentration areas. Every hour mattered. Railway platforms filled with men carrying civilian bags and military papers. Some arrived at units that were ready. Others were still traveling when German aircraft attacked the rail network. The diplomatic effort to avoid appearing provocative had imposed a military cost on the country being threatened. The cost fell unevenly. A formation missing transport could not move as planned. A regiment receiving reservists late could not occupy prepared positions on schedule. Railway authorities had to carry civilian traffic, military units, and requisition animals through a network that would become an immediate Luftwaffe target. Delaying a call-up by a day did not merely subtract 24 hours from a calendar. It placed thousands of individual journeys inside the opening phase of the invasion. One Polish order issued on August 30th moved in the opposite direction, away from the coast. At 12:50 in the afternoon, the Navy transmitted the signal to execute planned peaking. 3 destroyers, Błyskawica, Grom, and Burza, left Gdynia shortly after 2 o'clock and headed for Britain. Keeping them in the Baltic would almost certainly expose them to destruction or capture by superior German air and naval forces. Sending them away preserved part of the Polish fleet for the wider Allied war Warsaw believed was now unavoidable. As the destroyers passed through the Baltic, the German training battleship Schleswig-Holstein remained in Danzig. It had arrived under the cover of a ceremonial visit. A naval assault force was aboard, and its guns lay within close range of the Polish depot at Westerplatte. One navy was leaving to continue a war from foreign ports. Another was already positioned beside its first target. On the evening of August 30th, Henderson met Ribbentrop again in Berlin. The British government had suggested the normal diplomatic procedure. Once the German proposals were ready, the Polish ambassador could receive a copy, transmit it to Warsaw, and arrange the opening of talks. Ribbentrop instead produced a long document and read it aloud in German at high speed. Henderson expected to receive the text and did not try to record every clause as it passed. When he asked for a copy, Ribbentrop refused. The deadline for the arrival of a Polish plenipotentiary had expired, he said. It was now too late. The document contained 16 points. Danzig would return to Germany. A large part of the corridor would be subjected to a plebiscite under an international commission. German and Polish transit routes would be reorganized according to the result. Gdynia would remain Polish, while both Gdynia and Danzig would be demilitarized. Some elements could have appeared negotiable if they had been presented through an actual diplomatic process. They were not. Germany withheld the written terms until after declaring that Poland had failed to answer them. Henderson's telegram to London recorded the performance with unusual clarity. Ribbentrop had read the proposals at speed, refused to hand them over, and insisted that the absent Polish representative meant the opportunity had passed. Henderson again called the procedure an ultimatum. Ribbentrop denied it and said the idea existed only in the ambassador's imagination. When Henderson asked why the Polish ambassador could not simply be invited to receive the document, Ribbentrop responded that he would never ask him to come. The exchange gave the German government what it needed, a record that could be presented as an offer and a Polish rejection. Berlin also controlled the clock. Poland could be described as refusing terms it had never officially received, while German radio could broadcast those terms to the public as evidence of supposed moderation. British officials were not blind to the danger. They repeatedly instructed Warsaw to prevent frontier incidents, restrain inflammatory broadcasts, and avoid giving Germany anything that could be shaped into a pretext. Halifax acknowledged that Hitler was using reports of mistreatment and disorder to justify extreme action. At the same time, Britain asked Germany to impose matching restraint and warned that acts of sabotage by German agents were already being reported inside Poland. The pressure created an unequal test. Poland was expected to mobilize slowly, police a tense frontier, control violence involving a large German minority, and respond carefully to terms it had not seen. Germany was free to keep its armies concentrated, its press in a state of organized outrage, and its secret services active across the border. Restraint by the threatened state became another resource available to the aggressor. During August 31st, Warsaw formally confirmed its readiness for direct discussions. The Polish reply stated that troops would not violate the German frontier if Germany gave the same guarantee, and that an immediate arrangement was needed in Danzig, where Polish officials were being arrested and railway traffic disrupted. Halifax advised that Ambassador Josef Lipski should contact the German government at once and offer to transmit any proposals to Warsaw. Lipski sought the meeting. He was not authorized to sign a settlement on the spot, and Berlin treated that limit as proof that Poland was not serious. Yet the British diplomatic record shows that Poland had accepted the principle of direct talks. The dispute was no longer whether Warsaw would speak with Berlin. It was whether it would surrender normal sovereign procedure and place full powers in the hands of one envoy under a deadline created after the invasion plan was complete. By then, Hitler had already made the decision that governed the remaining hours. Directive Number 1 for the conduct of the war, dated August 31st, declared that political possibilities for a peaceful solution were exhausted. It ordered Case White to begin on September 1st at 4:45 in the morning. The timing applied not only to the land attack, but specifically to operations at Gdynia, the Bay of Danzig, and the railway bridge at Dessau, now Ksu. The directive also addressed the war Germany feared in the West. It ordered that responsibility for the opening of hostilities there should rest on Britain and France. German forces facing them were to conserve strength while Poland was defeated. The document did not read like a government discovering at the last moment that peace had failed. It allocated blame, fixed the hour, and coordinated separate theaters. Political preparation required one more layer. German propaganda had spent weeks presenting ethnic Germans as victims of uncontrolled Polish violence and frontier incidents as evidence that Warsaw was the aggressor. Some genuine clashes occurred in an atmosphere sharpened by mobilization, sabotage, fear, and competing national claims. German security organizations also manufactured incidents deliberately. The best documented took place at the radio station in Gliwice, then inside Germany, and now the Polish city of Gliwice. After the war, SS officer Alfred Najax gave a sworn account used at Nuremberg. He stated that Reinhard Heydrich had ordered him to stage an apparent Polish attack on the station. At noon on August 31st, Najax received the code word setting the operation for 8 o'clock that evening. The Gestapo supplied a human body for the deception. Najax described receiving a man who was alive but unconscious with blood across his face and having him placed at the entrance to the station. Other fabricated incidents were prepared with concentration camp prisoners dressed in Polish uniforms, killed and left where journalists could be shown the supposed attackers. The planners used the code name Canned Goods for these victims. The surviving trial evidence establishes the method more securely than it establishes every later detail about the identities of the dead. Najax and his team seized the station, fired shots, and transmitted a short Polish-language announcement from an emergency microphone. The broadcast claimed that the station was in Polish hands. It lasted only a few minutes. Its purpose was not to deceive military intelligence services, which could see German forces massed for invasion, but to provide a usable image: Polish raiders, Polish words on German airwaves, and a bloodied man who could be photographed as evidence. Gliwice was one part of a wider series of staged actions at Budin, Hindenburg, and other locations. The operation is often described as the pretext that caused the Second World War. The documents show something colder. It did not cause Hitler to attack. Case White had existed since April. The first attack date had already been issued and canceled, and Directive Number 1 had fixed a new date before the radio station was seized. Gleiwitz was designed to make a chosen war appear to be a response. The sequence explains the intense diplomatic activity of the final days. Hitler did not need Poland to accept his terms. He needed Britain to abandon its guarantee, or failing that, he needed a narrative that placed responsibility elsewhere. The premature raid at Jabłonków exposed the real order too soon. The false raid at Gleiwitz supplied the public story at the correct time. German radio broadcast the 16 proposals on the evening of August 31st and announced that Poland had effectively rejected them. The Polish government had not received them through the promised diplomatic channel before the deadline. Britain was still sending instructions intended to establish contact. These messages moved through embassies while German units were receiving their final operational orders. Along the frontier, the difference between negotiation and war had already become material. Engineers checked demolition charges. Border posts watched roads and railways. Luftwaffe crews had targets, fuel, and departure times. Army columns waited behind control points with orders to cross after the opening bombardments. Commanders had spent the extra 6 days adjusting deployments, disrupted by the cancellation of August 25th. The pause had not demobilized Germany. It had improved its readiness. In Poland, mobilization continued into the night. Reservists were still trying to reach units. Headquarters attempted to complete formations while preserving communications that would soon be attacked. The government knew invasion was likely, but knowing the date did not erase the consequences of a late general call-up or the difficulty of defending a frontier exposed on 3 sides. At sea, the 3 destroyers sent under Plan Peking were approaching British waters. Their departure had been criticized by some who saw powerful ships leaving when the coast was about to be attacked. Strategically, it recognized the scale of the coming war more accurately than any plan to sacrifice them in the Baltic. Bliskauka and Berza would survive the conflict. Grom would be sunk off Norway in 1940. All 3 had escaped the trap, closing around Poland. In Danzig, Schleswig-Holstein shifted into its firing position near Westerplatte. The old ship was not a modern battleship by 1939, but modernity was unnecessary at that range. Its heavy guns faced a small Polish garrison across the harbor channel. German police, SS formations, and local Nazi units prepared to seize Polish institutions in a free city, including the post office. The operation against Poland would begin as both a conventional invasion and a violent change of political authority inside Danzig. No declaration of war reached Warsaw before the attack. In the last hours, the German government maintained the language of rejected proposals, while its armed forces moved according to a timetable prepared months earlier. Negotiations continued in public, but they no longer governed German military action. The exact first shot of September 1st has become a dispute of clocks, records, and national memory. Hitler's directive fixed 4:45 as the coordinated attack time. Schleswig-Holstein opened fire on Westerplatte at approximately 4:47, according to German archival reconstruction, though 4:45 became the established public time. Luftwaffe attacks were beginning elsewhere within the same narrow span. At Tiksu, German aircraft and assault units attempted to secure the Vistula bridges before Polish engineers could destroy them. Near the western frontier, bombers approached Wylan. Wylan had no air defenses capable of stopping them. The first waves struck a town whose inhabitants had been told for weeks that war might come and might still be avoided. Bombs hit the All Saints Hospital, marked with Red Cross symbols, and residential streets. The exact number killed remains disputed, with estimates ranging from several hundred to far higher figures, but the character of the target is clear. The opening morning did not confine violence to soldiers or fortified positions. At Westerplatte, shells tore into the depot and German assault troops advanced after the bombardment. The Polish garrison had been expected to resist for hours. It held for 7 days. At Txu, the bridges Germany wanted intact were blown. Across the frontier, German formations entered Poland from the north, west, and south, supported by Slovak forces on the southern approaches. The brief interval between ultimatum and invasion disappeared into simultaneous attacks spread across hundreds of kilometers. Later that morning, Hitler addressed the Reichstag and claimed that Germany had been returning fire since 5:45. The statement reversed the sequence preserved in his own orders. Directive number 1 had fixed the attack. The security police and SD had fabricated border incidents. Najax had been waiting for Heydrich's code word. The speech did not explain why Germany went to war. It gave the German public the version prepared for them. Britain and France declared war on Germany on September 3rd after their ultimatums demanding withdrawal were ignored. Their declarations transformed the invasion of Poland into the European war Hitler had tried to localize. They did not produce the immediate Western offensive on the scale Poland needed. The Wehrmacht retained the freedom to concentrate the greater part of its striking power in the East, exactly as Directive number 1 had anticipated. The Soviet Union invaded eastern Poland on September 17th. Only then did the territorial arrangement hidden in Moscow become visible in military form. German and Soviet representatives adjusted their dividing line later that month and presented the partition as an accomplished fact. The secret protocol of August 23rd had not been an abstract diplomatic footnote. It had defined the space in which two powers expected the Polish state to disappear. Poland entered the war between two far larger states, with an incomplete mobilization and an allied strategy that could not relieve it in the opening weeks. Those facts explain the scale of the defeat that followed. They do not explain why the war began. The final 6 days do. Military orders, alliance calculations, diplomatic deadlines, sabotage units, radio broadcasts, and fabricated corpses were not separate episodes gathered afterwards into a story. They were parts of one process designed to begin a war while disputing responsibility for it. The evidence also separates cause from pretext. Danzig, minority disputes, and transit rights were real political questions. They did not compel Germany to issue case White in April, discuss living space in May, divide Poland with the Soviet Union in August, or stage Polish attacks on German soil. Those were decisions. The surviving documents show who made them, when they were made, and how the appearance of negotiation was maintained after the military outcome had been chosen. If you value long-form history built from the surviving record rather than inherited slogans, you can subscribe to history without chains. Physical traces of these 6 days remain, but the clearest evidence lies in the orders, protocols, and telegrams produced by the governments that moved Europe into war. The radio tower at Gliwice still stands. So does the documentary record that explains what happened beneath it. The April instructions for Case White, the secret protocol signed in Moscow, Henderson's telegram describing proposals read too quickly to follow, Hitler's directive fixing 4:45, and Najax's account of the unconscious man placed at the station entrance. The false broadcast lasted only a few minutes. Its purpose was to disguise a decision already made. The war announced around it lasted 6 years.